This week we're going to be talking about ideology. One of my pet peeves is that people use the word ideology when really what they just mean is idea, which is a waste of a perfectly good word, in my opinion. So in this video, I'm just going to be talking about how I think you could best use this word, ideology, and in the next video, we'll apply that to science. Okay. So by way of introduction, I'd like to tell you a little story from Daniel Dennett's excellent paper, Cognitive Wheels, the Frame Problem in AI. The relevance of this will hopefully become clear in a minute. Okay, so imagine you're a research scientist and you're trying to build an artificial intelligence. And you build one, you call it R1 for Robot 1. And you give R1 a particular task. That is, R1's got to go retrieve the batteries that it needs to sustain itself. Perfectly ordinary task that all living things go through. They got to find food. Okay, so you've given R1 the task of finding some food. And you put it in the following situation. You send it into a room where there's a battery, delicious battery, on a wagon, but also on the wagon is a bomb. Okay, so R1's very good at deducing things. So it deduces, if I pull the wagon, then the battery comes along, therefore I get the battery, therefore I get to live, hooray. So R1 pulls the wagon and the bomb comes along and it explodes and destroys R1. Okay, so we the research scientists go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what went wrong here? And what we realize is that we need R1 to not just deduce the consequences of its actions, but the side effects of its actions. So it correctly got that the battery was going to come along, but we needed to also realize that the bomb is going to come along. Okay, so we fix it up, give it a bigger brain, send it back into the same situation. Now it's capable of deducing the side effects of its actions. So call this R1D1 for Robot 1 Deducer 1. So better at deducing the side effects. So we send it back into the room with the wagon and the battery and the bomb and find that R1 looks at the situation and then just sits there. We can see from our monitors that its mind is whirring away at top speed. It's using all of its CPU power, but it's just staring at this wagon and battery and bomb until it explodes and destroys R1. So we say, okay, let's look at the tapes and see what happened there. And what we find is that R1D1 was perfectly good at deducing the side effects of its actions. So first it deduces that if I pull the wagon, then I get the battery, so good. And then it deduces that if I pull the wagon, then the bomb comes along as well, also good. But it spends most of its time deducing things like, if I pull the wagon, then its wheels will turn more than twice. If I pull the wagon, its position to the west wall will change. If I pull the wagon, its position with respect to Venus will change. If I pull the wagon, its position with respect to the moon will change. And so on and so forth. There's a kind of infinitely long list of side effects for any of our actions. And R1D1 was just going through them all, right? Just absolutely deducing every possible side effect without paying any attention to what were the important ones. So, okay. Now we've got it, right? Now we go back to the drawing board and what we say is, look, we need it to figure out which side effects are relevant. What are the important side effects? So good. We give it a relevance realizing algorithm. We give it a program that lets it sort out which are the important consequences and which are the unimportant consequences. Good, so we put it back in the room with the battery and the wagon and the bomb. And once again, so call this one R2D1, so Robot Relevance Realizing Deducer, something like that. And okay, so, but once again, R2D1 just sits there looking at the room and its mind is once again whirring away as fast as possible and the bomb blows up and destroys the robot. So we go back to the tapes and say, oh, what now? And what we find is that our programs were all working perfectly as designed. So R2D1 is successfully deducing things and deducing the consequences and side effects of its actions and successfully sorting them into relevant and irrelevant. So If I pull the wagon, then the battery comes. Relevant. If I pull the wagon, then the bomb comes. Relevant. If I pull the wagon, then its position with respect to Venus will change. Irrelevant. If I pull the wagon, then its position with respect to Saturn will change. Irrelevant. The problem here is that what we really wanted, but didn't realize, was a robot that not only focuses in on the relevant effects of its actions, but actually ignores the irrelevant ones. We need a robot that focuses in like we do. So notice that we do this a lot of the time. Not perfectly, but a lot of the time, we're able to figure out which side effects of our actions are going to be relevant, and we don't even consider the irrelevant ones by and large. It's an infinitely long list of completely uninteresting, irrelevant deductions that we could make, and we just don't even pay attention to them. Okay, so that's a pretty impressive thing that we do. We don't actually know how we do this, but we accomplish what you might call intelligently ignoring. We intelligently ignore almost everything almost all the time. So of the set of things that you could notice about your world, you pay attention to like such an amazingly tiny fraction, and somehow we manage to like narrow in on a bunch of, not all of, but a bunch of the relevant ones. So again, we don't know how we do this. We don't know how to make a robot do this. But it's this incredibly powerful faculty of our mind of intelligently ignoring almost everything. And you want to be like this. You don't have time or energy to pay attention to everything, of course. So somehow we got to get through the world by not paying attention to practically everything that you could potentially pay attention to, and just paying attention to this like ultra tiny slice of the world. Okay, so I think that's a general cognitive fact. It's going to be a fact about any finite rational agent. Any rational agent that has less than infinite powers of computation and processing is going to have to do this intelligently ignoring stuff. Okay, so I promise this is going to lead into ideology in a minute. So let me present to you my personal favorite definition of ideology, and then we'll go through a few others to kind of fill out the picture a bit more robustly. But this is related to the intelligently ignoring thing. So here is Donald Rumsfeld. He was an American politician in the last couple of decades. He was a Secretary of Defense. And in the run-up to the second U.S.-Iraq War, Donald Rumsfeld said the following. He says, "There are known knowns. There are things that we know that we know. There are known unknowns. That is to say, there are things that we know that we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. Things that we do not know, we do not know." Okay, so, you can put these in a kind of grid, right? Known knowns. I know what 5 times 5 is, and I know that I know that. I have the knowledge and I'm aware of it. There are known unknowns. I know that I don't know how many rocks are on the beach near my house, right? I know that I don't know that. There's some fact of the matter, but I know that I don't know that. And of course, there are unknown unknowns, things that I don't know that I don't know. I can't give you an example of that because I don't know that I don't know them. But notice that there's an empty spot in this little taxonomy. There's one that Rumsfeld didn't mention, and that would be the unknown knowns. And this guy, Slavoj Žižek, gives this as a kind of definition of what ideology is. That is, things that you know that you don't know that you know. Things that you're using as knowledge, but you're not consciously aware of. So sometimes our behavior is structured by things that we have intelligently ignored. We have decided or happen to not pay attention to them, but they're nonetheless structuring our behavior and our methods of generating beliefs and knowledge. So unknown knowns, that's a pretty good definition of ideology if you ask me. That is the kind of invisible framework that you bring to bear on the world. And this relates back to the robot story because we are intelligently ignoring almost everything about our world, right? So because to be rational agents, we have to not pay attention to practically everything. That means that you can't be paying constant attention to the framework that you're using to process the world through. Most of the time, the assumptions that you bring to bear on the world are things that would be intelligent to ignore because you just don't have time to be constantly questioning them. You'd be like the robot in the bomb and the battery. You just run out of time. Okay, so unknown knowns. That's one way of defining ideology. Think back to the insight problems that we talked about before. So this is a really nice example of unknown knowns, where in this case, for example, with the 9-dot problem, almost everybody who tries to solve this problem of using just 4 straight lines to cover all 9 dots assume things like you have to stay inside the box, or you're only allowed to change directions at one of the dots. So those are, in some sense, unknown knowns that you bring to bear when you're trying to solve the problem. You almost certainly didn't think to yourself when you first saw this thing, oh, I have to stay inside the box, or, oh, I'm only allowed to change directions at one of the dots. They structured your approach to the problem, but you didn't consciously realize that they were doing it. And that's just extremely common in the way that we approach things. I mean, you say the same thing in the Dunker candle problem, right? So you probably didn't think to yourself, the box with the tacks in it is for holding tacks and nothing else, right? That thought almost certainly didn't pass through your head. And if it did, you would have it available for kind of conscious questioning, and you probably could have solved the problem faster. Rather, you just kind of make assumptions about what boxes are for naturally, so you see through your assumptions rather than having them visible to you for conscious critique. So I think these kind of unknown knowns structure huge amounts of our cognitive life. And they kind of have to because we're finite rational agents. We have to intelligently ignore almost everything. There's very, very limited amount of processing power in our conscious awareness. So insight problems are a nice example of unknown knowns causing problems for us. Usually they're fine, right? The things that you ignore usually don't cause you problems. In insight problems, they cause issues for us. Okay. So what I've been developing here, if ideology is a set of unknown knowns, then it's kind of unconscious. But I want to flag that that's not the only way people use this word. So if you look up, definitions of ideology, there are academic papers with like 20 different definitions, many of which contradict each other. So here's Robert Putnam saying, ideology is an explicit, consciously held belief system. So some people think of ideology as the specific conscious ideas that you have about, the world and values and politics and stuff like that. Other people think the exact opposite. So here's Engels saying, ideology is a process accomplished by the so-called thinker consciously, it's true, but with a false consciousness. The real motive forces impelling him remain unknown to him, else it simply would not be an ideological process. So there's disagreement about whether it's going to be conscious or unconscious. I think we can maybe skirt around this issue a little by talking about just dogmatism. So if you're being dogmatic, you're not willing or able to examine a belief that you're using. Bertrand Russell here says, dogmatism and skepticism are both, in a sense, absolute philosophies. One is certain of knowing, the other of not knowing. What philosophy should dissipate is certainty, whether of knowledge or ignorance. Okay, so if there's something that comes out of having taken this course, I hope it's that you get a little bit of this philosophy, that we dissolve some of your certainties and your absolute uncertainties. So whether an ideology is conscious or unconscious, let's say that it's in some sense dogmatic. It's something that you're not actively examining at that moment. Maybe that it's not impossible for you to examine, but that you're not. Okay. And of course, typically the word ideology is used not in this very general, so the unknown knowns thing is a very general formulation. Typically it's used with respect to more kind of social, political values questions. So here's one from Malcolm Hamilton. He says, an ideology is a system of collectively held normative and reputedly factual ideas and beliefs and attitudes advocating a particular pattern of social relationships and arrangements. Okay, so notice a couple differences between this and the ones I just gave you. There's no mention of whether it's conscious or unconscious. And second, there's sort of explicit talk about values. So the values dimension of ideology is one that's going to be important for us in the next video. So values particularly about how societies should be arranged and run, how social relationships should go, and that sort of thing. So with all that in mind, let's come up with a working definition of ideology for the purposes of this course. This is by no means the one and only definition. As I said, there's like dozens and dozens in the literature, most of them written by people smarter than me. But for the sake of this course, let's go with the following. An ideology is a conscious or unconscious set of unquestioned beliefs, usually pertaining to social or political values, usually shared by a group, which shape the way we see the world. Okay, so let's go with that for now. And then the question is, can something like that shape the course of science? So do your sort of conscious or unconscious, relatively dogmatic beliefs about values and how the social world should go, does that affect the way science progresses? Can that impact your evaluations of scientific theories? So that's the topic of the next video.